Australia has been a sort of a catalyst, if you like, for just moments in the royal family's history.
Standing at last on Australian soil, on this spot that is the birthplace of the nation.
When he was still a bachelor and he was kissed on the beach in Cottesloe, he was coming out of the water. She planted a kiss on him.
Australia went bonkers for Diana, didn't it?
She had the most beautiful face. It wasn't just beauty, but you could see that she had a lovely, caring, loving face.
It's 10 years ago since William and Kate were in Australia.
He was so excited to see the little Bilby. He was literally squirming with excitement.
It's very cool. Thank you so much.
It really changed after the Australia tour.
Australia broke Harry and Meghan.
I've always had a great affection for Australia.
Not even incomparable Sydney Harbour ever presented a scene to equal that which marked the arrival of the Royal Liner Gothic. The sea has always played a big part in the life of the great city. Everything that could float came out to greet the Queen.
February 3, 1954, on a perfect summer day, a Queen arrives down under. At just 27 years old, a newly crowned Queen Elizabeth II, aboard the royal yacht, the Gothic, sailed into Sydney Harbour.
Along the 2-mile lane formed by yachts, the Queen and Duke headed towards Farm Cove. The Governor-General, Sir William Slim, welcomed Her Majesty on behalf of the whole Commonwealth of Australia. And after him came the Governor of New South Wales, then our good friend the Prime Minister, Mr Menzies, and other notables of the city itself.
The 1954 tour marked the start of a royal visit like no other for the Queen and her husband, Prince Philip.
Standing at last on Australian soil, on this spot that is the birthplace of the nation, I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
Fell for her. They loved her. She was beautiful and she was in love and she was very happy. There were thousands of people who saw her coming in and they just sort of adored her.
It was years in the making, and at the time, the biggest ever event planned on home soil.
This was colossal, and Australia, I suppose, in many ways, was the highlight of that tour, the reception for the Queen.
Around 1 million people turned out to catch a glimpse of the new monarch in Sydney. Incredible for a city with a population of just 1.9 million.
Now came the triumphal drive through the city to Government House. The decorations, on a scale far exceeding anything known in Australia before, cost £2 million.
In terms of a monarch, you know, those days, 1954, these were the first, very, very first days of television. The first televised event in Australia was humongous in terms of the public's interest in what was happening, but also the significance in the Commonwealth and the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth for us.
The Commonwealth was very anxious then to shrug off, if you like, the awfulness, the depression, the grimness of those war years. And this young Queen represented a change. The Queen was very much a breath of fresh air. And I think that tour really set the tone for that. And I think this was her saying to the world, I've arrived, I'm going to be different, I'm more accessible.
Post-World War II, Australia represented prosperity, rising living standards, employment and a population boom thanks to large-scale migration. It was the land of opportunity. The The Prime Minister was Sir Robert Menzies, a staunch monarchist who held a deep affection for the Queen.
A regal and lovely figure, she mounts the steps with the Prime Minister, Mr. Menzies, the beginning of an historic ceremony.
The Queen was the first reigning monarch to visit Australia just 8 months after her coronation.
Her father, King George, was due to come earlier than that, but then of course he died. The trip was put off and then she eventually came. She left behind Charles and Anne, who were then 5 and 3.
The Australia tour was meticulously planned. Undeterred by the blistering heat, the royals visited 57 towns and cities over 58 days, from Sydney to regional New South Wales.
Another highlight of their Australian visit. At Jameson Valley, the striking rock formation known as the Three Sisters.
Before heading to the capital.
In Canberra, the Queen unveils a memorial to Americans who served in the Pacific Theatre during World War II.
With a sense of deep gratitude, that I unveil this monument, which has been set up by the Australian people in acknowledgement of America's part in the Second World War.
Here in the national capital, Her Majesty writes a new page in Australia's history, a history in which the name of the Fuzzy Wuzzies has an important part.
It was here the Queen opened Parliament.
Papuan Constabulary present arms in a royal salute and await inspection by their Commander-in-Chief.
By plane, train, ship and car, the royal tour traversed the nation. The only glitch was an outbreak of polio in WA.
The Premier then said, look, you need to stay on the ship and only eat that food during that time.
The marathon tour set the standard for the next generation of working royals.
Her accessibility then, back in the 50s, was nothing as compared to the accessibility that the royal family has striven for since. But nevertheless, it heralded a new era, a new approach by the royals, a new way of being seen, interacting with the public.
In 1963, the Queen and Prince Philip returned to Australia. It was a different kind of tour, fewer events and more of a uniquely Australian experience. Elizabeth II would make 16 trips to Australia. Her last in 2011. Her reign spanned 16 prime ministers.
I did but see her passing by, and yet I loved her till I died.
The Prince smiles and waves, showing no sign of tiredness despite his long flight.
In 1966, a young, impressionable teenager landed in Sydney, but of course, this was not your average teenager. This was royalty. At the age of 17, the young Prince Charles was shipped to Victoria to Timbertop, the Geelong grammar school that shaped a king in waiting.
Companionship of young Australians in the outback will broaden the Prince's outlook, helping to equip him for the responsibilities that lie ahead.
He was sent there because the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh felt that he needed a bit of change and he wasn't a happy child.
And so he swapped royal life for a stint in the bush.
He went there as a 17-year-old. He went there sort of to get the posh bits knocked off him.
It changed him a lot because it was the first time in his life that he could be himself. He felt that there was nobody watching him, he didn't have to be careful of whatever he said, and he did, and that people just accepted him for who he was.
What has the reaction been among the other boys? Have you heard anything from them at all?
Well, I had a copy yesterday morning of their own paper that they produced, and as far as I can make out, much is taken up with fallacies in the press and on TV.
It was the start of Charles's long love affair with this country.
A lot of people forget, perhaps, that age 16 or 17, when I spent 6 months, I learned a hell of a lot. I was able to go around relatively privately and find out an awful lot about that part of the world. And as you can imagine, I have a huge affection as a result. I've been through my fair share of being called a pommy bastard, I can assure you.
It was a rigorous 6 months at Timbertop. His princely title didn't stop him from having to endure the tough conditions of the Aussie Alps, from cutting firewood to spending time in the great outdoors.
He complained about, we couldn't cook our tin food because of the risk of bushfires, and we had to eat cold food. He said his hands got covered in blisters.
The dealing with the crocodiles and the spiders and God knows, all the things I remember so well. Not alone the ants, when I was in Australia all those years ago, in 1966.
It did rough him up a little bit because, the thing about Australians is they, as he said, they call a spade a spade.
The Prince loved it so much he stayed for 2 terms.
It gave me an insight into the character of this country and the individuals who have shaped it by the force of their personalities and by their infectious good humour. While I was here, I had the pommy bits bashed off me.
I think it would be fair to say that was the beginning of his lifelong fondness for Australia.
It was indeed the start of his long association with Australia. Prince Charles knew how to charm Aussies, and in return, the Aussies charmed him.
When he was still a bachelor and he was kissed on the beach in Colossal in WA, he was coming out of the water. A very pretty young model, 26-year-old model Jane Priest, ran up to him, planted a kiss on him.
The profits from which will be donated to the Queen's Silver Jubilee organisation.
In 1977, on the set of Countdown, Prince Charles was interviewed by a very nervous Molly Meldrum.
And now we come to the most important part of the... Sorry. All right. Could I just have one glass of water, please? No. I'm terribly sorry about it. Doesn't?
I certainly learned some interesting new Australian words from Mr. Meldrum, and if he could have read my mind, he would have learned some interesting new English words from me.
But the Prince's popularity soon reached fever pitch thanks to his new wife, Princess Diana.
The wedding was absolutely astonishing. It was called a fairy tale wedding, and there was this beautiful young woman, and Charles, who'd longed to get married, but it was very difficult for an heir to the throne to find someone who would want to marry them, and everybody was full of joy for him.
In 1983, in their first overseas tour together as husband and wife, Prince Charles and Princess Diana toured Australia with 10-month-old Prince William in tow, the first time royal children were allowed to travel.
My wife and I are greatly touched by such a warm welcome here. We've received an amazing series of welcomes all over Australia.
The crowds adored the new princess.
Australia went bonkers for Diana, didn't it? I mean, people were talking then about this was the new Beatlemania. If you remember when the Beatles first started, people were screaming and, all of that kind of stuff. They went nuts for Diana.
That trip went very well for Diana, of course, because she's a 22-year-old, and her voice, we wanted to hear her voice because we'd seen pictures of her, but for the first time in Australia, we actually got to hear her, to see what she sounded like.
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise.
Plastic whale that throws things out the top.
He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
They climbed Uluru. Back then it was Ayers Rock, where Diana struggled with the outback heat.
Fortunately, where we are in Britain, the weather is never really good enough for barbecues regularly.
The crowds at the Sydney Opera House went hysterical as the royal couple danced their way across the country over 4 weeks. This was the first public dance by the pair at a function anywhere in the world. The land down under was under their spell.
We have both been greatly impressed by the display you've put on this morning.
No doubt most of you will now need to have a long rest and at least several tubes of beer to recover.
But it was Diana who stole the nation's heart.
She had the most beautiful face. She had enormous eyes, and they were, you know, she would flirt them a bit, and she just was lovely, wonderful complexion, very carefully made hair, and she was just one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen.
The young princess's outfits were the talk of the town, and she didn't disappoint.
The great thing about Diana's style was that it was essentially hers. You know, those beautiful big white collars on the grass on the lawn when she sat down and William played with the toy. She was so tall, so elegant. Those legs went on for days. This was the first time that we'd seen this very, very young, glamorous princess.
While the spotlight was on the glamorous princess, Charles became jealous.
One of the big problems with Charles and Diana from the get-go was her incredible popularity, and to the point that I suppose he almost felt ignored when they were in public, because all eyes were on her.
Prince Charles used to mutter, I know they've not come to see me, they just want to see her. And I think he felt very, not upset, but he felt that nobody wanted him.
Did the Australia trip tip that marriage over the edge?
Look, they'd only been married a couple of years. Even from their honeymoon, she realised that there were areas of incompatibility, of course. I think this highlighted that when they were working together, there were going to be some issues.
When the pair returned in 1988, there were certainly no public signs that trouble was brewing.
And yes, they danced together, they shared moments of affection. But there is no doubt that tour and the attention that Diana got caused a lot of friction.
Our lot, my wife and I, has been to start the dancing, which I can assure you makes the heart sink. Dancing with princesses can be dangerous, I can assure you.
There were moments of harmony. But the crowds were there to see one woman, the beautiful, fashionable, lovable royal who charmed the nation.
I wanted to kiss her hand myself, but he's not going to wash his hand for a couple of days anyway.
Everybody adored Diana. She had charm, she knew how to talk to everyone, she was kind and stunningly beautiful.
There was this young, beautiful, dynamic woman who suddenly everybody wanted to shake hands with or wanted to smile at or have a chat to. And so when the moment that they'd go one direction, she'd go one, he'd go the other, he'd almost hear a sigh when the people on his side that they weren't going to get Diana.
But years later, it was over. As news spread of Charles and Diana's split and Charles's love affair with Camilla Parker Bowles was exposed, the headlines were damaging for the palace. In Australia, for the first time, the conversation turned to a republic.
We're proposing nothing more than the obvious. Our head of state should embody and represent Australia's values and traditions, Australia's experience and aspirations. We need not apologise for the nationalism in these sentiments. In truth, they contain as much common sense as patriotism. This is a point I think worth making. This Republican initiative is not an exercise in jingoism. It is not accompanied by the beat of drums or chess. It asserts nothing more than our unique identity.
I just think that time was passing, the country was changing, and they saw that as a time to move on.
Neither controversy nor politics in Australia had ever influenced the Queen.
She didn't have any day-to-day role. The governor represented her, and I think that sort of calmed people down, that she wasn't actually trying to steal anybody away from its natural place.
The palace letters released to the public in 2020 revealed the Queen played no part, nor was told about the infamous dismissal of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam in 1975.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
2 years after his split from Diana, Charles came back to Australia to try and turn public sentiment. But it was overshadowed by an attempt on his life. As he was being introduced to a crowd at Sydney's Darling Harbour, there were 2 shots. "23-year-old David Kane came within a metre of the Royal. It was later revealed he fired blank shots to protest the treatment of Cambodian asylum seekers.
He later said, in an interview that, you think that you're going to react like James Bond or Indiana Jones, but you don't. That's not how you respond. You sort of freeze. But it gave him some, you contemplate what the role means.
A 1999 referendum on a republic was ultimately unsuccessful. In the 15 years that followed, the British royal family travelled regularly to Australia and supported the country through natural disasters. It wasn't long, though, before the land down under welcomed in a new generation of royals.
It's 10 years ago since William and Kate were in Australia, and certainly that tour really set along the Wales' journey.
If there was ever any doubt about the British monarchy winning hearts and minds in Australia, that doubt was quashed by one little boy. Prince George, not even 12 months old, in the arms of his mother, and of course, the centre of attention, as the family touched down in Sydney in 2014.
Little Prince George got a huge reception, and I think that when you look at royal tours, that is easily one of the most successful in history. Huge crowds greeting them wherever they went.
This is for Catherine?
Yes.
She might come out here in a minute. Keep going past. Got a big present there for you.
Congratulations.
Do you want to give these to Catherine? Some flowers as
Who's
well.
this for?
Shall I take them?
It's for all of us. You can open it. Wow, look at that. It's such a generous present. Thank you very much. Did you put it together? Oh, it's someone from the back who gave it to us. Thank you for the present.
The Duchess of Cambridge's yellow dress lit up the harbour as crowds watched on in adoration, hoping to catch a glimpse.
For William and Kate, they were still pretty much newlyweds at the time. They'd only been married 2 or 3 years, and that really settled them into royal life.
The trip was as triumphant as it was grand. The couple loved Australia, and Australia loved them back. But there was a special love for a little boy who rose to the occasion. Christopher Jackson photographed the tour, capturing this image of the young family at Taronga Zoo.
I love this photo. This moment I will never forget. As Princess Catherine brought George out, he was so excited to see the little Bilby. He was literally squirming with excitement, and to kind of be up close and personal with this little marsupial was clearly very special for him and for the whole family.
Prince George did his very best to embarrass Mum and Dad on the world's stage.
Munch, guys. All right. He does love it, honestly.
This was Prince George in his element as just a little kid, and we don't normally see that interaction with the young royal children too much, but William and Kate were really keen to introduce him to Australians.
I suspect George's first word might be Bilby.
While George had a well-earned rest, Mum and Dad worked the crowds, travelling up to the top end.
This is a very important and special moment. Visiting such an important place for everyone in Australia was clearly something that was very important for them to do on this visit, and to see them in such spectacular and stunning scenery on a very beautiful kind of late afternoon. You don't often get to photograph the royals in such stunning and important scenery. Of course, we remember Prince Charles and Princess Diana visiting back in 1983 this same important place, and it was special to see William and Catherine back there looking so happy and enjoying the moment.
Well, Kate and William's tour was always going to be compared to Diana's and Charles's, and both tours very, very similar in terms of bringing a baby to them as well. But what was different about Kate and William's was the affection shown between them that was pretty much lacking from Charles and Diana as well.
The then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge got their turn to get up close and personal with Aussie wildlife and had fun along the way.
Face the water! Go!
This trip really captured the imagination of the Australian public, and you can see from this photo there was literally thousands of people keen to catch a glimpse of the royal couple. And for a photographer, you never really know what's going to happen, what gift is going to be thrust into the royals' hands, so you have to be aware and be ready to capture those moments.
The single women of Australia didn't know what hit them when a 30-year-old Prince Harry arrived in Sydney. After completing a 4-week stint with the Australian Defence Force in 2015, one fan saw the royal off with a kiss.
It was a very different world for Prince Harry when he was last in Australia. As a single man, he was having marriage proposals, young women were throwing themselves at him, and he was taking it in his stride. I think he really liked the attention. He liked being the sort of joker of the royal pack.
3 years later, the Lothario was now a loving husband. The brand new royal rock stars Harry and Meghan hit town for the Invictus Games in 2018, and it started off with a bang. Another royal baby on the way.
Since then, the tour really gathered a huge level of publicity, and I think that caught them unaware. Indeed, Meghan found it quite daunting. She couldn't believe the amount of people that had turned up outside the Sydney Opera House.
Congratulations, Meghan.
From Sydney to Bondi, Meghan was embracing Aussie life.
We've got some veggies.
Harry was embracing his hair.
You got red hair. Red hair's very cool, isn't it? Do you like having red hair?
A special visit to drought-affected Dubbo, the rain on the day they arrived, a welcome relief.
You have just lived through 2 years of drought. And despite recent welcome rain, it is going to take a lot more and a long time to recover.
They visited schools.
Is this when you got there at school?
And charmed the crowds.
Hey, Ryan. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What's his
Nobody's
name?
fine.
Well?
Nobody's fine. Congratulations on your baby. Thank you so much.
Australia was obsessed.
I think they loved Australia, and I think Australia responded to them. Bear in mind, in those very early days of Meghan and Harry, Meghan got an incredible reception from the public, both at home and abroad. She was literally, I mean, if Diana had been a breath of fresh air, you can multiply that by 2 for Meghan for all sorts of reasons.
But this tour marked the beginning of the end.
It really changed after the Australia tour, after our South Pacific tour.
That's when we announced we were pregnant with Archie. That was our first tour.
But it was also the first time that the family got to see how incredible she is at the job. And that brought back memories.
Australia broke Harry and Meghan. Indeed, it was one of the catalysts, I think, for them leaving the royal family.
I think she and Harry had expected that they would get much more praise and recognition from that tour. There were no trumpets, there was no fanfare. They just came back, and as far as palace officials were concerned, hey, it's another royal tour.
And she was part of a big institution, and she wasn't the hero of it. She was a cog in the wheel of the institution, and I think that became very clear to her quite quickly.
It really is a case of what could have been for Harry and Meghan, and even though Australia tour was such a success, it's really unfortunate that we're not going to see another one of them as part of the royal family.
Travelling to Commonwealth countries remains an important part of King Charles's role as head of state to continue the work his mother set out to do. The fact Australia is a priority, despite his cancer diagnosis, speaks to the love and fondness he has for this country. This is the 4th time Charles and Camilla have visited Australia, but their first as King and Queen.
The visit to Australia is hugely important for the King. In fact, he wanted to get out there as soon as possible after the late Queen's passing. He really wanted to hit the ground running in the infancy of his reign, and it hasn't really been possible. You know, he's been concentrating on his cancer recovery in order to give it his best shot.
Anyone who's gone through cancer feels beleaguered, can feel tired. The fact that he's prepared to make that long journey speaks volumes about not only what he feels about Australia, but what he feels about his position and the monarchy.
The pair are frequent flyers to Australia, in 2012 marking the Queen's Diamond Jubilee.
That was a fantastic year where many of the royals jetted off all around the world on behalf of Queen Elizabeth.
It seems to me you're never off duty, rather like my husband.
Amongst his kind of joyous moments, there was more poignant moments, and this was certainly a very important part of that tour for Charles and Camilla to, you know, show their respects to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice.
A quick cuddle with some furry friends. They loved it so much they were back 3 years later when Australia got to wish the Prince of Wales a happy 67th birthday.
I brought a bit of birthday rain. Because rain is a blessing I know only too well in this part of the world.
Before kicking off the Commonwealth Games in 2018. This trip is even more special, the first for King Charles since taking the throne. But how much will it stave off the Republican movement? Do you think that this will put that to bed now?
Well, look, even mutterings within the palace when the Queen died was that, you know, they would suddenly start to drop countries and that people wouldn't, you know, have that affection and loyalty that they had to the Queen. But there's a lot of conflict, a lot of drama in the royal family at the moment, so I think that interest is still high.
So what is it about us that keeps them coming back down under?
Australia has been a sort of a catalyst, if you like, for just moments in the royal family's history.
You are at home when you are here, and you are truly amongst friends.
I think there's an enormous warmth between both the UK people and Australia people. Australia, of course, came to help us fight in World War I and World War II, and although the generations go by, there's something that important stays with you in the background.
Australia has a unique place in the royal family's hearts. It's somewhere where we find a huge companionship with Aussies. It's somewhere where we have shared history. But when you look at the basis of the monarchy, our shared history, our shared values, the fact that the Commonwealth is such an important part of our legacy for both countries, it's hugely important for the members of the royal family, including the King, Queen. Hopefully the Prince and Princess of Wales will get back down under very, very soon, because it's a real special place in all of our hearts.
As I say, I've always had a great affection for Australia and for Australians. And I mean, all I've ever tried to do, as far as Australia is concerned, is to try and help and encourage and assist in whatever way I can.